How to sacrifice in chess? How do you know if the sacrifice you're planning or you're looking at is good enough? How do you know if you get enough compensation once you lose that piece? In this video, we're going to talk about how to sacrifice in chess when it's actually worth, when it is actually working, when it makes actually sense to sacrifice the piece and you get enough compensation or you get enough things for the sacrifice and it's a good move and you should actually play it. So, how to sacrifice in chess? Let's talk about that. So, I'm going to give you some tips, some general ideas, and then I'm going to show you positions, and then I'm going to talk about those positions, and then I'm going to tell you what the master thought, so he decided to play the sacrifice. So, first of all, some theory. When you're going to sacrifice a piece, you need to know that you're losing material, but you're getting things. Which are the things you're getting? Very often you will have like a mate in 2 or 3 moves. We're going to see examples about that. Some or times you can get material, like you sacrifice a knight, but then you get a rook. That's also fine. And some or in some other positions, you're going to sacrifice a bishop, for example, and you will get compensation, like nothing directly you can touch with your hand, but you get compensation, like you have a lot of attack, you have a lot of initiative, and maybe it's not so easy to assess the position, but you know you have good things and enough activity to compensate for the piece you lost. So that's another kind of sacrifice, when you sacrifice for compensation. And there's another a kind of sacrifice that is very important, very interesting, and also we're going to see examples here, and it is a positional sacrifice. And this time you sacrifice a piece or a pawn or the exchange, and you get positional benefits for the sacrifice. I'm talking about you get a better pawn structure. I'm talking about you get an outpost for your knight, maybe. I'm talking about you get a lot of activity like an open file, 7th rank, things like those that positionally compensate the sacrifice. So that's the idea. Those are some of the things you can get when you sacrifice. The way to assess the sacrifice is once you sacrifice, for example, if you're attacking and you sacrifice a piece, you should think, well, I'm going to lose material here. You should think, do I get enough compensation? For example, in general, when you sacrifice, you create weaknesses. That's good. But the question is, do you have initiative? Do you create threats after the sacrifice? Because if you sacrifice something, but then your opponent takes the initiative, probably it's not going to work because he has the initiative. He's going to come back in the game. So just to finish with the theory, make sure when you sacrifice, first of all, you're creating weaknesses. Secondly, you have the initiative. Third, you have pieces active, so you can actually take advantage of your opponent's weaknesses and take advantage of your own activity. So keep those things in mind, and those are the minimum requirements for a sacrifice to work in general. So keep them in mind. Don't sacrifice for no reason. If you sacrifice and you don't have initiative, probably it's not going to work. If you sacrifice and you don't create any weakness, you don't create any problem in your opponent's position, probably it's not making sense. If you sacrifice and your opponent has 5 pieces defending and you're attacking with 2 pieces, it's not working. Don't sacrifice. You're losing the game because of that. So keep in mind all these things. We're going to move to the board and we're going to see examples, real life masters, famous examples where there are sacrifices and the sacrifices are instructive for some reason. So we have the first position here. It is black to move. And this position, black is winning with some interesting, nice sacrifice. This is actually a very clear type of sacrifice because here you just sacrifice and you mate, right? This is one of the examples we were highlighting earlier. So in this case, you just sacrifice the rook here, then you sacrifice the queen here, and then you're going to mate. It's a sacrifice. You're losing a rook. You're losing maybe a queen, but then it's mate. So this is the kind of sacrifice where you sacrifice something but you mate. So let me show you. Check first, check later, and then checkmate. So again, you sacrifice and you mate. Let's see another example. This time it is white to move, and there's a nice sacrifice here, and we get material advantage this time. So let me show you. The king and the queen are both on the same line. You can give a check, but the king is close enough to come back and defend the queen. Probably over e6 is better, so they don't get another skewer over here. So queen takes pawn, king here, they are fine. But we can do something first. We can disconnect these pieces a little first. For example, we can make the queen go here, and then the skewer is going to be very strong. So the first move is going to be a sacrifice, and then we get material advantage. You're going to lose a rook, but then you're going to get a queen. First move here, rook c7, they capture. I mean, there's a pain, right? They have to capture. And then you get a pawn, and it's a skewer, so you get the queen at the end. So this is sacrifice to get material advantage. Very interesting and very instructive. And the next example is a super famous position. This is by Morphy. This is the opera game. Here, okay, this is very interesting because this time we have a sacrifice for compensation. This means that you don't sacrifice and you made it in this position. This means that you don't sacrifice and you get material advantage in this position. In this position, Morphy sacrificed and he got a compensation activity. He created weaknesses and he thought those things were compensating the material he lost. So this is a tough kind of sacrifice, right? It's much more complicated than the previous one. And I'm going to show you so you get the idea. He sacrifices the knight for these 2 pawns. But then he opens lines over here against the king. The instructive question, guys, here is, how do you know when something like this is actually working? How do you know when you can sacrifice and get compensation? How do you know if the compensation is enough? I can tell you that the compensation is enough this time because, first of all, you're not losing much material. You're only losing 1 point. Secondly, you're opening lines against the king. Third, black pieces are undeveloped. Fourth, black king is still in the center. So all those things together compensate 1 point that you're losing. So the lines that you're opening are totally okay, and they are actually compensating in a situation like this one. Let me show you. You capture, and then he castled queenside. Do you see what happens now? Do you see why we have compensation? Because there's a pin here, there's a pin here, and there's a lot of pressure here. That's why there is compensation. Black king is in the middle of the board, and black king is not able to castle in the short term. In the next 2-3 moves, the king is not going to castle. There's not a solution in the short term for that king in the center. That's why the sacrifice compensates this time. Keep that in mind when you're planning a sacrifice. Think this way so you can evaluate the sacrifice and decide whether it's a good or a bad thing for you. Well, after this, very quickly, I can show you what happened in the game, just in case you're not sure. There was another sacrifice to bring the rook quickly and continue putting more pressure. And then there was this capture and finally a mate in 2. Here a sacrifice for a mate. So Morphy sacrificed the queen here to mate here in the next. So queen b8 and then rook d8. I don't think we need to talk anything else about this one, but don't forget, because this is actually a tough one. Well, the next one, here it is white to move, and white is winning. Now, this is very important and very famous. This is what we call Greek gift sacrifice. So here is white to move, and the master with white played the move bishop takes a7. So how do we know, in a real game, how do we know whether our bishop takes h7 idea is working? That's a very important question. We're going to talk about that. The thing is that this is the typical sacrifice, so that's why I included this one in the list, because this is typical. This is something you're going to see very often, and this is something you need to know, something you need to study. This position actually happens a lot. Whenever you have a sacrifice and a knight is coming to g5 and the queen is coming to h5, or, well, in general to the h file, to connect with the knight and mate here, whenever you have something like that, then the sacrifice is very likely to work. Also, it's very important to keep in mind to make sure black is not able to defend a7, like here, or they're not able to defend a7 with a bishop, like here. So those things are also very important. But in general, if you can sacrifice a bishop, come with a knight, and connect a queen to create a checkmate idea, that's very likely to work. Keep that in mind. The Greek gift sacrifice happens a lot, and you can win many games with this. Let's see what happened in the game. Bishop takes a7, then knight check. And then, well, if king g8, you just play queen h3, mating over here. I don't think black can escape. In the game, king g6 was played, and then well, this idea, queen h3, I mean the same idea we were saying, and black is totally lost. Observe, you're threatening mate here on a7. They just try this move, so they can move to f6 after taking that pawn, and then, well, we have a mate in 3, like check, check, and mate. By the way, another sacrifice here, but this is a sacrifice, very clear and simple sacrifice, because you know you're mating in the next. So about this one, we should highlight one more time. This is Greek gift sacrifice, typical. If you don't know it, try to learn it, because it's going to happen in your games. You need to know it, it's very common. So the way to sacrifice here is keeping in mind all the things you need when you're going to play the Greek gift sacrifice. Like the bishop, the knight, the queen should be able to go, and black pieces are not really defending the king. Also, one more thing, these pawns should be at the initial position. I didn't say that. So that's also a requirement, so the Greek gift sacrifice works. So that's Greek gifts. We need to talk about another important sacrifice. This is also typical. That's why I included this one as well, because it happens more or less often. And if you know this, it's something you are going to be using in your games. You're going to be applying this almost for sure, because it happens in real games. Take a look at the move bishop takes a7 for a moment. So the thing is that this is what we call double bishop sacrifice. In some situations, if you can sacrifice the two bishops for these pawns and then bring two major pieces controlling those files, the sacrifice is going to work and you're going to create problems. Of course, one more time you need these pawns at the initial position. One more time you need black pieces not defending very well the king side, as it is happening right now. And, well, of course you need the pieces, I mean the bishops, sacrificing here on h and g. So those are requirements, those are things you're going to need for sure. But if you have those things, you're very likely to be able to win with the double bishop sacrifice. Let me show you what happens with this sacrifice. You just play bishop takes pawn, and then you just play rook check first, and then you sacrifice on g7. The idea is that after they capture, I mean, if they don't capture, you're still coming with the queen over here. It's going to be winning. We're not getting into that, but this is something typical that we already know. So if they capture here, you just give a check, and then it's mate in the next, because if they go here, you mate with the rook there, and if they go here, you mate with the queen here. So I think in the game, yeah, in this game they just resigned after this queen g4 check. So keep in mind, double bishop sacrifice, it happens a lot. Black pawns, or enemy pawns at the initial position, the two bishops are able to get sacrificed over there. You need the major pieces able to come, of course, and black pieces not defending. If you have those things, you can assess this sacrifice as almost for sure winning, almost for sure working, and then you can play it in your game. Finally, the most complicated and interesting example is this one. This happened in a super famous game. I think this is Steiny's immortal game. This is a positional sacrifice. The positional sacrifices are the hardest ones to assess, because you are sacrificing material not for checkmate, not for material. You are sacrificing material for positional benefits. This is hard to assess even for high level players. It's not so easy. In this position, Steinis played the move pawn to d5, and well, this is hard. I can tell you that there are many good things after the sacrifice. I mean, black cannot capture like this because there is a pin. Black cannot capture like this because there is checkmate, so they need to capture like this. So what has happened after this move, right? d5, pawn takes pawn. Well, the thing is that a lot of things happened. First of all, your opponent had an outpost here, and now you have an outpost here, and he doesn't, of course. Another thing is you had an isolated pawn before the sacrifice. Then after the sacrifice, he has the isolated pawn. More things we should highlight. The outpost here is connected with a weakness on e6. That's very important, because you're going to be able to exploit the weakness because of this connection of d4 and e6. More things we should say, you're opening the file, if this is a file that you are controlling, so that's also a very good thing. And all these things together are even more important when we keep in mind that black king is still in the center. So that's the idea. This is a positional pawn sacrifice. You are creating some outposts, creating a weakness in your opponent's position, controlling more squares, that's why it works. The rest of the game is just fantastic. I will show you very quickly, but basically it's just improving, taking the weaknesses we were highlighting, and at some point another sacrifice, but this is clear because there's material involved, and this is not clear, but we're not going to analyze it super deep. A lot of calculation behind the sacrifice, but basically if the queen takes, you get the rook here, and with the king takes, you give a check, and this ends up with checkmate. We don't need to, I mean, checkmate or a lot of material. We're not going to analyze it, but that's the idea. After the opponent played the king f8, Steinis played this check. It's more or less clear because the rook is defended. But then this move is amazing. Rook g7, beautiful sacrifice. Calculation behind the sacrifice. I mean, there's a lot of calculation in all the lines. White is winning, but this is a brilliant move. We should say that. If the queen takes, you get the rook, and you're good. If the king takes, you get the queen with check, and of course you're good. Again, our goal is not to understand this combination. Our goal is to get familiar with sacrifices. So I'm not going to delay much talking about it, but enjoy it anyway. After this, black plays the move. Well, I don't think we have the rest of the game, but basically it's like this. They play this, you capture, and then play this. And then Steinis comes back again, another brilliant idea. It looks like he's repeating, but not really, because now the file is open. So now he has a forced mate. I think it's in like in 9 moves, let's say. So it's like shack, 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 and then he's forcing the king, and eventually he gets into this. Exactly knight f7, and then queen d6. And then it's made exactly 9 moves. By the way, we should say that when he plays this move queen h4, he's sacrificing the rook. But again, this is sacrifice for mate, right? This is not like for compensation, for material. This is clear. Of course, the calculation is very deep behind, so it's not really that clear. But well, in any case, that's the idea. I hope this analysis about sacrifices has been helpful. I hope you have enjoyed it and you have learned. If you have questions, please let me know in the comments. I would be happy to interact. Like the video if you think it was good. Subscribe if you think the channel is interesting. Thank you very much for your time. I'll catch you guys in the next.